It's day 64, everyone. It's the last day of July, and I thought today I'll catch up on a topic that we discussed a bit last time, which is at some point your team's probably going to be growing. You may be hiring people, and you want to hire maybe some team leads. Or the question is, do you hire them new? Are you going to promote internally? And I want to talk a bit about my experience on this. Obviously, what are then the various roles? What does the CEO do? The CFO? What does the chief legal do? What does a chief operational officer do? What about the chief HR officer? What about the chief marketing officer? And so on and so on. And I want to give you a bit of some roles and some thoughts when it comes to all of that. Obviously, it's all very individual to your company, to the field. Obviously, a physical kind of company has a bit of a different structure than something like a tech company, and so on. So, and I think that's very important, but I want to give you some tips, some tricks, and obviously some things to watch out for. First, be very careful with a title inflation early on in your company. I think these are the big mistakes people do. I don't think we did this at Cake. Maybe in my prior company we had this title inflation, but yeah, I think giving out, for example, C levels early on is a bit of a, just be very careful. Even like vice presidents or something, you can start with head offs and you can promote later on. Otherwise, you really have this title inflation, very difficult to get rid of it afterwards. But this is just something to kind of watch out for. I also think all the way to probably 5 to 10 people, maybe 10 people, there shouldn't be any kind of managers in the company because that's not needed. Anyone needs to be hand on. And even afterwards, I think all the way to maybe 60, 70 people, basically everyone should always have some hands on work. We discussed this in the past couple of weeks as well during the catch ups, being hands on, being hands off, and so on, because I think this is really, really, really crucial. So, the other topic then is, if you're hiring those people, are you going to hire them externally or are you going to promote internally? And this really depends on the skill set that you have in your team, because obviously kind of looking for team leads is a very different skill than being a specialist, a professional, an expert in that field. And it's very dangerous and can be very hurtful if you have someone that, just because that was that first engineer, that you're promoting that person to the chief technology officer, for example, right? So these are things you have to be really, really careful. It's going to be a tough conversation, but at the end, you need to think of the company and you need to think of the tough and but important decision to bring someone in from the outside if needed. Okay, so if all this is there, then what should be the various roles? What should be the various departments that you should be thinking of? Obviously, you have the CEO. At the end, the CEO leads everything. The CEO generally tends to fall into various categories. Most of the time, you have a CEO who's either more on the business side, on the marketing side, or you have a CTO that's more on the product or technical or engineering side. It's very rare that you have a CTO who is really basically an all-rounder on everything. And well, in my times as a CEO, I've never been that so far. I could imagine if I were ever to do a medical startup, I mean, something I've always been dreaming of, but if I do a medical startup, there I believe I could basically have all hats on. I could have the marketing side, I could have the business side, I would have the product side, I would have the engineering side, because I understand those things really, really well on the medical side, because this is what I studied. But so far it's been always more on the marketing side. So that's where it generally falls. So far, my co-founders have always been more on the technical side. Let's say you don't have those co-founders, then at some point you really need people who really lead the engineering. And engineering is really the code, it's the efficiency on that. Now, whether you give that person the CTO role or not, that's a different story. Maybe it's just VP of engineering, but that does not matter, right? So you need someone to really lead that. That's a very different function from product itself. Product itself, to me, is what the user sees. And generally, the user doesn't really care so much about the tech. The user cares about the user experience, cares about how the product works, cares about the design, cares about all the kind of the functions and so on. And so to me, that's a very crucial role. In some companies, design sits on the product. In some companies, it depends a bit on how you want to prioritize that. You keep this kind of separate. For example, in our company, engineering, product, and design all report separately to the CEO. I prefer it this way because that kind of gives a bit of checks and balances when it comes to the functionality, the product, the delivery speed, the engineering, and at the same time, how everything looks and feels. But some people say, you know what, actually, I want design to report into product, but I'll leave this up a bit to you. So I think that's very, very specific. That's everything when it comes to me, when it comes to product engineering. At least that's one field. Now, obviously, if you are more in a manufacturing business, you have other roles there as well, but that's in a tech company, kind of the sense here. Okay, on the other side, and to me, any good business starts with two functions and two functions only, and that's building stuff and marketing or selling stuff. So you need the CMO, you need someone who does marketing. Now, marketing, sales can be two different channels, depends a bit on what you do, but let's say this is all this kind of distribution channel. Additional, for example, partnerships can be in there as well, a BD guy, business and development. This is also very independent or depends a bit on the company. Are these separate streams? Or are these things that all kind of report into the CMO? And it depends a bit on the CMO. I've had both in the company. I've had a CMO where everything reported in there, sales, marketing, and the business development. And I've had actually that all three were separate, reporting to me as the CEO. It really depends a bit on your preference, on your skill set, on your expertise. And since this is a function that I understand really well, I wanted to have that separate. The same on the product engineering side. The reason I want to have product and design separate is because I believe I understand that well. Whereas on engineering, this was completely separate because I really did not understand that so well. So I needed to have that help there. And then away from that, we obviously have a lot of the corporate functions. Now, the dangerous part is that these corporate functions blow up too big too early. And generally, these teams are really, really good at blowing up these functions. So you have to be constantly careful that these teams grow in regards to the other functions, to the business, right? What do you have there? Well, obviously, you need a finance department, and that is absolutely crucial. Depends a bit on the team, depends on how big you need that. Absolutely essential. With that, you're probably going to have a legal department. Maybe at the beginning, you only want to do with an external law firm. You maybe have a legal specialist in-house, and then you have someone outside who helps there. Over time, you maybe have a more experienced person in-house. Obviously, depends a bit. In crypto, legal and compliance is really important, so you need to have that. And then at the end, you also have HR. I think also in HR, be very careful that you don't grow that team too early, too big. Maybe at the beginning, keep only one person there, a specialist who's very executional, and maybe have a law firm help you with those things. Now, that leaves one role, and I think that role is always a difficult role for people to understand, and that is the Chief Operational Officer, COO. And it can be an absolute crucial role, and this role can be very like it's very flexible how the other roles can report with that role or what reports into this role. For example, if you look at Apple with Steve Jobs, Tim Cook was the person who really worked on the supply chain, and the operation side was that, right? SpaceX, a lot there with Gwen Shotwell, Elon Musk being the CEO, Gwen Shotwell, the COO, very, very good on really streamlining all the launches. So many times the COO is more of the executional kind of role. The CFO takes care of the finances, legal takes more the legal side, HR of the personnel, marketing actually does the marketing, but the COO is really good on the day-to-day side, making sure that what the CEO does, maybe more from a larger scale, really breaks it down and works kind of aligning all those steps out. So the COO actually can function in all those areas. The dangerous part is that you as a CEO, you basically just say, you know what, you become more like a chief of staff almost, and the COO, and sometimes the chief of staff can be almost like a COO. But that's a dangerous part. If you have a really good COO, you really allocate the COO into those resources directly. And many times, right, the COO actually goes in and works, for example, with sales and marketing, make sure that those fund flows kind of work in and gets some of the corporate functions and aligns that there really nicely so that those things work really well. So that kind of gives a bit of an overview of the different functions, hiring new kind of upstreaming teams internally. Let me know what your thoughts on this is. If you have questions, would always be interesting. And I hope that gives you a bit of some insights how we do this at Cake and how you may be doing this at your own startup. With this, have a beautiful week, everyone. We're starting August, so let's see how it goes. All the best, Julian. Bye-bye.